I always talk about the fact that at this stage, clients have only really seen that ultimate number go up, and just making sure that they're mentally prepared for them to actually start to
Welcome to
withdraw
Live
from
Greater
that.
View, a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, well, welcome back to another episode of the Live Greater View. I'm Chris Mellone, partner and certified financial planner here at VLP.
I'm Dan Lash, also a partner and also a certified financial planner here at VLP.
Cool. We got a good topic for us today. We're coming up on year end, and this conversation typically happens, I'd say, across our firm at least 4 or 5 times at the end of the year. Should I retire or should I work another year?
Yeah. It's part of that depends on what's happening at work. You know, how happy or unhappy are you, and what kind of planning you've done, already.
Yeah, we're going to talk about things that, could impact, hey, I'm going to stay on board for another year, things that say, hey, it's probably a good time for you to wind it down at work. So let's go ahead and dive in. So are there any risks to consider or what are the risks, I should say, to working an additional year? How do you actually start this conversation with clients when they just come in and say, hey, here are my thoughts and where do I go from here?
Yeah, I think the risks are around, hey, how happy are you at work? Can you handle doing another year? And what does your happiness look like if you had just stopped working, right? So part of it is just, how are you in life? How are you feeling? What are you feeling like? Are you just done working? Because some people get to a point, depending on what they've done for a living, they're just exhausted,
right?
Physically, mentally exhausted, and they just need to just stop.
Right.
But when we start doing planning for clients and you go, hey, here's what one extra year looks like, people are usually pretty amazed at just 1 year making so much difference.
Right. And I think that's a good place for us to start to really, pull on that thread. So let's talk about some of the things or some of the benefits to actually working another year. The first one is obvious. Your savings continue to grow, and what you've actually built up in most instances can continue to compound.
Yeah, you're continuing to put money into your 401k plan or whatever vehicle you're using towards retirement savings, IRAs, Roths, things like that. But the other thing I remind people is it's 1 year of not spending money.
Yeah, so it's double-sided.
Right. It's almost like 2 years.
Right.
Is kind of what I talk about.
Right.
And they're like, oh, it's only a year. It's not that big a deal. I go, it's 1 year of putting more money in and one less year of taking money out.
Right. And related to investments, I always talk about also how your asset allocation is already dialed in, whether you work another year or not in most instances. So you're not beholden to the market in that scenario because we've already made sure that you have enough money in bonds, and what we're having in stock is the appropriate amount for that stage of the game.
Yeah. The other thing we're talking recently is if you're under Medicare age of 65 and you're going to retire, you go, okay, well, what does your employer health insurance look like as opposed to you going out into the private market?
Yeah.
And, they might be so subsidized, or the employer might be paying the vast majority of it. And you go, hey, that's a big expense that you're now going to have to cover.
Yeah.
Now there is COBRA and things like that, but eventually you're going to have to cover that. But even the COBRA is more expensive than typically is what's coming out of pocket currently while employed.
Right. And a lot of meetings that we have, clients know, hey, it's a big number, but they don't know how big that is until they actually, go out to the marketplace and look at some of that stuff. So that's great. How about Social Security benefits? That's something that also will tie into all of this of, hey, should I keep working or should I ultimately retire?
Well, it's just, it's again similar to putting money in for retirement or putting more money in for retirement. You're putting more money into Social Security. It should, on a little base, I mean, it's not a ton more money that you're going to get in your Social Security projection by putting one more year in. Yeah. But it's usually at the end of your working career and your peak earning years, and you're putting the most in you've ever put in to Social Security in one calendar year. Yeah. So it certainly does make a difference. And it allows people to say, hey, because I'm working, I don't have to necessarily think about starting Social Security early,
right?
Because I don't need to, because I'll still have the income for another year.
Right. And, we talked about the asset allocation, some of the savings rates, while we're still talking about that sort of investment, type of thing. I always talk about the fact that at this stage, clients have only really seen that ultimate number go up, and just making sure that they're mentally prepared for them to actually start to withdraw from that money and ultimately see that number go down. That's something that we talk about a lot. Let's unpack some of that.
Well, I guess I'm curious. So when that happens, do you ever have anybody who says, "Hey, well, what if I lived longer?"
Lived longer in what?
In retirement, right? If you
Right.
plan to live to 90, they go, "Well, what if I lived to 94?"
Yeah.
And then you go, "Well, that changes sort of the numbers,
Right.
right?"
Right.
That's the difficult part of doing retirement planning. Of none of us know when we're going to go.
Yeah.
Same with Social Security filing.
Right.
I could tell everybody when to file for Social Security if they just told me what day they would no longer be living.
Yeah.
That would be easy.
Yeah, the crystal ball.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I just think that when they ultimately know, hey, you know what, that number that I've seen get bigger and bigger and bigger, now I'm actually mentally prepared to start withdrawing on that. That's just a psychological shift, because typically we work with type A clients and they're very good at saving. And it's just something that I think is important to talk about with them when they cross this bridge. So,
Yeah, well, and then the other thing to talk about, I mean, we can also discuss this, is what if they're not able to retire when they want to? Maybe they're being forced to not. We got a lot of government employees in this area who are being asked not to come back to the federal government. And if you're, late 50s, early 60s, well, I wasn't planning on retiring, but now I'm being forced to. What do you see when it comes to that?
So I think that, it's case by case, but I think a lot of that depends on how they're wired. Because to me, it's one of those things of, well, are you the kind of person that can ultimately leave the workforce and be content? Do you have kids? Do you have hobbies? Do you have these other things that are going to take up your time?
Yeah.
Or are you the kind of person that's wired to say, hey, I might be home for a month and then I'm going to go crazy if you're in your late 50s, early 60s. So to me, a lot of that's personality based, assuming that the assets are there. And obviously we've been doing our job and the planning pieces in place also.
So may not be mentally prepared for retirement at that point.
Right.
This was being forced upon them as opposed to them voluntarily saying, hey, I want to go ahead and do this.
Right, because that person is typically anticipating working until they're, say, mid-60s, and all of a sudden, emotionally and mentally, now they're sort of on their heels and in a lot different situation than what they had anticipated. So I think that's really important, as part of that conversation.
So beyond the mental aspect of, are you ready yet? Right, that's a whole nother thing. And I think that's true of somebody who we're doing planning for, who we say, hey, this is the year you can retire, and they go, I don't know if I wanted to retire at that age. And certainly if they're being forced to retire, they really probably don't know. Right. So the question is how, if it's being forced upon them, what sort of adjustments need to be made from a planning perspective and saying, okay, can you really retire now? Because it's maybe 2 years before you thought you were going to, or 3 potentially, or hopefully not that many more.
Yeah, so obviously I think that the expense piece, like you talked about, hey, what's actually going out the door, that comes more into focus, because now all of a sudden we're asked to not only save 3 or 4 less years, but we're 3 or 4 more years that are going out the door. That definitely comes more into focus. In some instances, the asset allocation piece would come into focus also, with us having a time horizon in that example of, hey, we're planning for 5 years and all of a sudden it's next month, then that would likely need to be tweaked also.
Yeah.
And then the distribution rate, if we're planning to distribute 5 to 6% of the portfolio over 20 years, and all of a sudden that 20 is turning into 25 or even 30, well, then that's just making sure that that's reasonable relative to what they have saved.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would dial in?
Well, the other thing to, for people to consider is that might be a 6 or 7% distribution rate prior to filing for Social Security. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when we show people the projections, we go, look, your assets are going to go down. You're going to rely more on your assets to provide you with all the income you need, whether you're being forced to retire early or not, or even waiting. Because typically it's not always better, to defer Social Security because of the greater benefit that you get. Mm-hmm. So what we tend to see is people's portfolios provide them with that income, but it's portfolios going down slightly every single year potentially, depending on the market. And we've been getting 3 really good years in the market where you go, oh, I've made so much. You go, but that's not going to last forever, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I remind clients of. I tell them beforehand, because I don't want them to be surprised when they come in and do a meeting and we look at their portfolio and they go, it's going down. You go, yeah, we anticipated that.
Yeah.
That was the expectation, because we're not taking Social Security. But once you start taking Social Security, there'll be less money coming out of the portfolio, and hence portfolio should start rising slightly.
Right. How does the conversation go where somebody, winds up in your office and they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm kind of on the fence. I could retire, have the assets, but I don't really have the vision for what I want to do for retirement.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are so much healthier for longer today. I mean, that's not everybody, but in general. And you're going, okay, well, what are you going to do with that time? And you've spent the last 40 or 50 years just grinding, going to work, and maybe you really love what you do. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's great. Makes it easy to go do every single day. But when somebody says, okay, today's Friday, on Monday, you're just not going back anymore. Mm-hmm. Really start having the conversation with clients 5-10 years before retirement of, you need to start thinking about the things that you're going to do to fill up your time. Because initially what I've heard from clients is the first few months feels like a really extended long vacation. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of hits them that, all right, I'm really not going back to work. I need to find something to do with my day.
Right.
And I find that's more of a challenge for people than saying they're going to retire. Right, they've been thinking about retirement because, I don't know, people start talking about it in their 20s. Yeah. That's why they're putting money in their retirement accounts.
Right.
But once it comes to a head, then they're going, okay, what am I going to do? But I do find that after a couple of years, and for some it's a couple, some less years, less amount of time, clients are usually saying, I'm busier now than I ever was when I was working.
I find the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find the same thing.
Because they find things to get into. Usually a lot of volunteering, obviously. And once you get into volunteering, they reel you in to do more volunteering.
Yeah, volunteering, helping out with grandkids.
Yeah, family.
Stuff. Yeah, just stuff, and same kind of thing where they stay active, and next thing you know, their calendars are full.
Yeah, things, it's usually like things they go, these are always things that I thought about I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I just never had the time.
Yeah. And something that we're big on too is just really trying to emphasize the effort that it takes to plan for, let's say, 6-month or a 12-month period, because we'll have clients, they'll sit down either around the holidays or very beginning of the year, they'll plan for the entire year, and then we'll have some that tend to drag their feet. They don't get stuff on paper, and it's just nice to have all of that stuff outlined and do the little bit of upfront work just so you do have a calendar and you are busy. Yep. And you're able to do all those things.
Yeah, and the other thing, going back to what you said about delaying retirement, right? What I find for those people is somewhat liberating of, hey, we've done a plan and said you could retire at 62, and they go, well, but I'm just not ready. Mm-hmm. This is fantastic that I could, but I just don't know if I want to. It's liberating in the sense that they go, I'm not going to work because I have to anymore, and if I have issues at work with my boss or coworkers, and it's just a headache, I don't have to deal with this headache.
Yep.
Prior, I did because I didn't have, I just had to go to work and make money and save. But now they've been told, you have enough, you don't have to. And so they're voluntarily going to work. And it changes the mindset. Right. And I've had clients talk to me about it, saying, look, yeah, I just try not to deal with stuff. And if I'm having to deal with stuff that I don't want to at work, I just go, I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah. Do you find in your meetings when you plan all of this stuff out, do you find that most clients do retire at the initial date that you set, or do you find oftentimes they're moving that up or back by some segment?
Yeah. So when we're doing planning, I mean, obviously, clients give us all their goals, and one of those is, hey, what is the goal that you'd like to retire? And so we start there, but I always work sort of backwards and go, what is the year that they could retire and still meet all these other goals, the spending goals? Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a year before they said they wanted to, right? They go, oh, I'm going to work to 65. And I'm going, well, you could actually stop at 64 based on the numbers that we're looking at. Mm-hmm. They tend to find that enlightening, and they're like, really? Oh, yeah. But they just thought, hey, I could only do it I have to wait till 65, and they're being told they can do it earlier. Mm-hmm. It's probably, I don't know, it depends on the conditions. It's probably most are saying, well, if I could retire, then great. Probably more than half are more than willing to go. If for some reason we're telling them to retire significantly earlier than they thought, which that's kind of rare, then they may not just be emotionally ready to do it, or they just like work. They enjoy what they do. I'm 51 years old. I think about, what does 10 to 15 years look like for me? And I really like what I do, right? There's some days that it's a headache and, it's like, oh, this is really, really busy, but I enjoy coming to the office still. And there will probably come a point where either the office doesn't want me to come here or I'm not ready, but I don't know what that is. It's not like a light switch where you go, one day you just wake up and go, I just can't do this anymore. And maybe it happens for some people, but I don't know.
Yeah. I found in my experience, we'll pick, sort of like you said, hey, this is what we're working towards. And then as we get closer and closer, then I'll share, hey, look, this is what we're shooting for in the next year or two, but now you have the ability to retire. And that almost like you said, it's a mindset shift and almost reinvigorates them in a lot of different situations. And they actually end up working either to that date or even maybe a little bit longer, just because it's just a different mindset. There's not as much pressure. They're saving money. They like to know that they just have a lot of flexibility and almost run the scoreboard up some. But I think it's that mindset shift that's the most important part of that.
Yeah. So even if they wait another year, like we started the conversation around, or they just go, I'm not ready, and you go, that's fine. You just will have more money to spend in retirement. They just go, well, we only budgeted $5,000 a year for travel, but if I work longer, could I travel and spend more? You go, well, yeah, we have more money saved at this point. They go, oh, well, now that changes their ideas around what they may want to do in retirement. Go, I might be willing to work 2 or 3 more years. I may be voluntarily doing it, but I might be doing it so I can get even more out of the things I want to do in retirement.
Yeah. Or in some instances, they work on a more specific basis where they're not working a full schedule. They have some sort of flexibility, and that just kind of takes shape, and then they ultimately retire. When it's time to
I hear that frequently from clients. They go, maybe I'm going to go back to my employer and see if I can go down to 30 hours and keep my benefits.
Yeah.
Or will they be willing to give me 20 hours? It depends on the position and the company. I tell all of them, I go, you should ask.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling obviously it depends on the relationship you have with your employer, but telling them, hey, look, I'm probably retiring in a year. I'm doing the planning, and it's not going to come to a surprise if you're 64 years old and going to your employer and going, I'm probably retiring in a year. They're going, yeah, well, most people do around 65-ish.
Yeah.
So it's not, but you're giving them the ability to prepare for your retirement. But it also goes, hey, then you may be able to say, can I negotiate? I'd be willing to work at, after 65, but I really don't want to put in a 40 to 50 hour work week. I want it to be 20 to 30 hours. Is that something that you see? And I see sometimes employers are willing to accept that, and that helps with that transition.
Right.
People aren't going. It's again not a light switch where they're just not showing up on Monday. They're going, well, I'm going to work a little bit less, and I can sort of get used to this process.
Yeah. What about some of the tougher conversations that you've had, or even where you meet with somebody and you say to yourself, hey, that person, they need to retire? What goes into those situations that you'd say that it's time for them to walk away?
Oh, I don't really. I usually have more of those conversations of, you can't retire at the age you just said you wanted to, based on the amount of money that you want to spend and the amount of money that you have saved.
Yeah. Unless
you know something about your health that you will not live past age 80, let's say, or something else, you have a health condition that, but that may come back to the same thing that you just mentioned was, what about people who just need to retire? And sometimes it's, what do you want out of this life? Mm-hmm. You don't want to be old and, I wouldn't say on your deathbed, but reflecting back on life and having regrets. And if one of those is a regret of, I shouldn't have worked so much, I should have spent more time with my family or friends and gotten more things out of this life. And you can Google it. They interview older people all the time and say, what are some of the regrets that you have?
Right.
And you don't want to just say, hey, I'm going to look back on this and I made more money because I worked longer, but there's a happiness factor that comes into that as well.
Yeah, and I think in those instances, from my experience, it tends to come back to worrying about the market, worrying about things that are out of their control.
Right.
And that's where we try to do our best to talk about some of the bear markets we've been through, our process for what distribution should look like, how we do have a plan when inevitably the market fluctuates. And those tend to make some of those conversations easier, where you'd say, hey, if we have a 25% drawdown over the next quarter, here's what the portfolio should look like, and here's what we do to try to show them, it'll be okay, and you can let go. So
yeah, I was talking to a client yesterday, and he worries about tail risk, right? The worst case scenarios, and they happen, right? Because obviously he's in early 60s, but he's been through the dot-com bubble, and he's seen these bad things happen, and wants to avoid them. And I go, but in order to avoid them, that means you got to miss all the good years in between. Yeah. And those good years significantly outweigh the bad years. Yep. And you just have to go, okay, I'm going to plan for it because I know it's going to happen. And it's more than likely going to happen in my 20 or 30 years in retirement. You just plan for it, right? You go, okay, we have a plan for this. We've been through it with multiple clients in retirement.
Yep.
And you look at all our other podcasts that we've done, we've talked about, on average, market goes down 10% every 18 months and about 20% every 5 years.
Yep.
You go, this isn't anything new. Everybody's been through it. Don't worry about the thing we know is probably coming. Just plan for it.
Yeah. Have you had clients that have retired and then gone back to work? Not necessarily financial, planning related, but just from a psyche standpoint?
Yes, not lots. And usually it's work that they don't necessarily, it's usually not work related to what they were doing before. Sometimes,
that's interesting.
Sometimes it is, but it's usually, hey, I'm going to go work at a golf course because I golf, and they're going to pay me money. Like, I don't even want the money. I don't really care, but I'm working there just to get some free golf, and they're going to pay me something to work there.
Yeah.
Side jobs, or they had something that interests them, like landscaping. Right. And now they go, well, I used to love working in the yard and doing stuff. Now I became a certified landscaper, and I'm doing some side work for people that I know. Right. And yeah, I'm making some money. And I've seen more of that as opposed to people going, I just can't be retired and I want to go right back to a 40, 50-hour work week. I've rarely seen that.
Yeah. I've never had that happen, for the clients that I've worked with either. Same thing. Sometimes they'll go back and do things that, they make a little bit of money. A lot of times they're just volunteering, and it's more so just filling up their time, obviously not finding, something to go back to for work purposes. So
yeah, giving back to your community is always great. And most Americans are happy to do that. They want to give back to their community in some form or fashion, and they just weren't able to as much when they were working full time, especially when they were working and raising kids. They had no time.
Yep.
It's just really, really difficult. Now they're going, I have all this time. I just freed up 40, 50 hours of my week to go do things. Well, how am I going to fill it up?
Right. Cool. Well, I know we bounced around a lot, but I think that's a lot of valuable context through our experiences. And I think the takeaway for me is, hey, there's pros, there's cons, and, speaking with a firm like ours and our experiences, we can add a lot of value from saying, hey, here's what we've seen, here's things to consider. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And hopefully that conversation adds some value.
Yeah, I mean, retirement planning is not one size fits all, right? Everybody's situation is slightly different, and everybody comes at it from a different way. I've had clients who said it was a goal to retire before 60. They just didn't want to work past 60. Yeah. And they saved a ton because that was their goal, and they started planning early for it. But others go, no, I'm good. I like what I do. And it tends to be more men than women, because men historically associate who they are with what they do more.
Yep.
That's why when we get together at parties, we all go, hey, what do you guys do? Yeah. And our wives are meeting with their wives and going, hey, how's the family? Yeah. So they're talking about different things. It's kind of weird. I don't know why. Hunter-gatherer mentality. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, it's to bring it back. The most important thing, and this is something that we touch on all the time here, is if you're not doing a plan, it's going to be very, very difficult to figure these things out. And that planning should probably start in your mid-40s when things are relatively stable from a work and, kid standpoint. Mm-hmm. And the sooner you start planning, the more likely you are to have these different options in the future. What we tend to find is the people who don't plan, they don't have a whole lot of options.
It's a one-way street.
Right.
Those are the conversations that aren't fun, but it's just reality.
Exactly. Those are, no, you can't retire now because you didn't plan. So you're just far more successful if you put a plan in place and then review the plan fairly regularly. It doesn't have to be every single year, maybe every 2 years. Certainly every year when you're about 5 years out from whatever year it is that you wanted to retire or age.
Right.
But otherwise, update it every couple so often and make sure you're staying on track for where you want to go.
Yeah, and even for our younger clients, the planning piece, that they see the value in what we do, but I always bring up the fact in the meetings, if we're not the one that are stirring the pot in these conversations with them and their spouse, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to talk about it. They won't think about it. They won't talk about it. They're just going to get busy and life takes over.
Life gets in the way.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, Dan, thank you. And to our listeners, as always, thank you for checking this out. We've blown through 1,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Awesome. That's
so
really cool.
We're having a lot of fun doing this. Topics like this often come up in conversations that we have with clients. So if there's anything that you'd like to see us discuss on air, please feel free to let us know.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Greater View. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.